Military encounters with the unexplained often vanish into classified archives, never seeing the light of day, until now. We're blowing the lid off a deeply unsettling incident, an underwater confrontation with something that defies all rational explanation. Navy SEALs, trained to handle anything the world throws at them, were pushed to their breaking point by a creature that seems to belong in a sci-fi nightmare. Buckle up for the most terrifying thing you might ever see.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the Meris, Alabama hijacking. In 2009, there was a cargo ship called the Meris, Alabama that was out to sea. During this time, it ended up being captured by pirates, and when they eventually fled the ship, they took off in a lifeboat but kept the captain, Captain Richard Phillips, as hostage. Naval ships arrived to the scene, led by the USS Bainbridge, and this is what led to a standoff. SEAL team members were then called in to help. They were flown in over the situation where they then parachuted into the water so that they could be picked up by the Bainbridge. The standoff lasted for an unbelievable 5 days, and this is where the snipers come in. In order to stop the standoff and rescue the captain, SEAL team members made use of their snipers, who took out 3 of the pirates, which allowed them the ability to rescue the captain. If this sounds like a familiar story, you might have seen the 2013 film Captain Phillips with Tom Hanks, which of course was inspired by this very real, insane story of a SEAL rescue mission. In our number 9 spot today, we have Just Cause. In 1989, a group of Navy SEALs were involved in the US invasion of Panama, and during this, they had 2 main objectives. One was to disable the boat that the president of Panama might use to escape, and the other was to disable the plane he might use. When they got to the boat, things went smoothly. They had no issues getting this done. The airfield, however, was a very, very different experience. They ended up coming under heavy fire, which left 8 SEALs wounded. Rather than being able to disable the plane, they actually ended up having to take it out with a rocket. At the end of the mission, while the objectives certainly were completed, it ended in the deaths of 4 SEALs and 9 more who were wounded. In our number 8 spot today, we have Saving the Dam. During the invasion of Iraq, as the Iraqi forces retreated, it was discovered that there was something big that needed to now be worried about. The coalition forces grew concerned that the retreating forces would destroy a hydroelectric dam in order to help slow the advance of US troops. Of course, this led to the teams kind of weighing out the dangers and the pros and cons, and this led to the realization that the worst case scenario would leave the dam destroyed, which would cut off the surrounding area from badly needed power, and it would also lead to mass amounts of flooding that would of course take countless lives, and that was something that just could not be risked. This led to a joint mission between the SEALs and the Polish Special Forces being put into action. In the end, they were able to secure the dam with no casualties, which saved a huge amount of lives. In our number 7 spot today, we have Octave Fusion. This is an operation from 2012 that came into play after it was discovered that Jessica Buchanan and Paul Hagen Thisted had been kidnapped. They chose SEAL Team 6 for the mission to rescue them. The 2 who had been kidnapped were originally in Somalia on an aid mission, which was centered around removing landmines, but they were taken as hostages while trying to do this work. Rescue missions like this don't just happen overnight, and they take a lot of planning, but after a few weeks, Jessica's health began to decline, and they knew they needed to take action as soon as possible. The teams parachuted in at night at a location that was about 2 miles away from where the hostages were being held, and they made the rest of their way in on foot. Once they arrived there, of course, only chaos ensued. The goal was to save the hostages, of course, and they wanted to capture those who had taken them, but the engagement only ended in the death of the captors. In the end, the hostages were rescued without any injuries. In our number 6 spot today, we have the rescue mission. So this is the 2012 rescue mission that took place in order to rescue 4 aid workers who had been kidnapped in Afghanistan. Using both UK and US forces, they created an incredible task force who worked diligently together to rescue these people. They used satellites to watch the kidnappers' compound while the forces set up a forward operating base that was within striking distance. They began trying to negotiate with the kidnappers, but things quickly deteriorated, and this led to a 2-pronged attack being put forward. They used the cover of darkness to approach, and in the end, they were able to save all 4 of the aid workers successfully. This was likely an incredibly stressful few weeks for everyone involved, but in the end, it showed what the power of teamwork and great leadership can do. In our number 5 spot today, we have Gothic Serpent. So this was an operation that took place in Mogadishu, Somalia during the Somali Civil War in 1993. The main objective of the operation was to capture a military officer who was wanted for attacks against United Nations troops back in 1992. So basically in the beginning things were going fairly well, I guess if you can even say that. They were able to capture and arrest some of the people surrounding the main target, they were able to seize some weapons, that sort of stuff, but something happened later that completely changed the course. Basically, the men of the person they were trying to capture were able to shoot down a Black Hawk helicopter, and the subsequent rescue mission that took place was disastrous. In the end, the troops were just overrun, and this resulted in way too many casualties. The troops were in for quite a battle, one that would go on to become one of the most devastating defeats experienced in close combat by American troops. This went on to have a major effect on American foreign policy, and it effectively ended the United Nations mission in Somalia. In our number 4 spot today we have the Doctor Rescue. For another 2012 kidnapping, apparently there was a lot of them, we have that of Dr. Dilip Joseph, as well as 2 others who were with him during travel to a rural clinic in Afghanistan. When it was discovered that these men had been taken, they were already being kept somewhere in the mountains, and those who had taken them were demanding a ransom. After a while, the 2 men with the doctor were released, but he was still kept behind, still under the threat of harm. This is when SEAL Team 6 was sent in because they were convinced that the doctor was in danger. In the end, the rescue mission ended with the successful rescue of the doctor and the arrest of 2 of the leaders of the group that had kidnapped him, but it also did end in 6 deaths, which sadly includes a member of the SEAL team, Petty Officer First Class Nicholas D. Check, whose selfless service will never be forgotten. In our number 3 spot today we have Red Wings. Back in June of 2005, this operation took place and it was intended to see the capture of a high-ranking Taliban official. There were 4 Navy SEALs who were tasked with surveillance and recon of a group of structures that were known to be used by the target as well as his men. During some of the first hours of the operation, the SEALs were attacked, and this attack ended up claiming 3 out of the 4 of their lives. The final surviving SEAL was unconscious and seriously wounded, but still alive, and he was later rescued from the area. Unfortunately, this was not the end of the casualties, however. Once it was discovered that the team of 4 SEALs had been ambushed, 1 out of the 2 Quick Reaction Forces, or QRF helicopters, was sent in to aid the SEALs, but it ended up getting shot down by an RPG-7. This ended up taking the lives of all 8 Navy SEALs and all 8 US Army Special Operations aviators on board. In our number 2 spot today we have Urgent Fury. So back in 1983, the United States invaded Grenada on a mission that was aimed at protecting the American citizens that were within its borders. In the beginning, there was a SEAL team that was assigned to doing recon for the Marines that were to later come ashore, but that is not where their job ended, as they were later reassigned on 2 missions. One was to extract Grenada's Governor General, and the other was to capture the only radio tower that the country had. This is where the disaster sort of starts. So basically, due to a lack of information prior and the fact that they were headed in during a storm, resulted in 4 of the SEALs meant to be helping in these missions getting lost off of the island's coast. The remaining SEALs ended up splitting into 2 teams to divide and conquer their 2 missions. The first team ended up making it to the Governor General's mansion in order to grab him, but this is when they discovered that they left their communication equipment on the helicopter. This left them surrounded by hostile forces with little resources, so they used the mansion's phone to call in an AC-130 airstrike, and they were able to escape. The other team that went for the tower ended up getting pinned down, and this led to them just destroying the tower. They then swam out to the open sea, where they were waiting for hours before being picked up. Many people have been openly critical about this mission, but at the end of the day, I am certainly no Navy SEAL, so I can't really criticize anyone here. In our number 1 spot today we have Neptune Spear. This is most definitely the most famous of all of the Navy SEAL missions, and it took place in May of 2011. This was actually a CIA mission, but it involved SEAL Team 6 in a huge way. This was the mission where they were going to raid a compound where it was believed that Osama bin Laden was staying. To prepare for this mission, they had a full, life-sized replica of the compound made in North Carolina, and it said that it was used extensively in the preparation. Americans. Once it was time for the operation to take place, all those involved in the raid flew from Afghanistan to Pakistan in the middle of the night. The entire operation lasted about 40 minutes and it involved a brief firefight. In the end, several occupants of the compound along with the main target were killed. This was a mission that took nearly 10 years of monitoring and planning to complete, and I know it truly was an unforgettable moment in American history.
Starting off this countdown, we have the USS Hornet. This ship has been given the name the most haunted ship in the Navy, and rightfully so. Within 27 years, the ship has been blamed for the death of 300 men. Now, it's believed that at least 50 of the men that died on board the ship still haunt it. A number of Navy personnel have heard strange voices while on the ship. Some have even seen apparitions of sailors in outdated uniforms just roaming the halls. Not only that, but equipment would turn on and off on its own. Thankfully, the ship was decommissioned in 1970 because people were getting hella creeped out. But nowadays, the ship is used for tours if you want the chance to witness something paranormal. Moving on at number 9, we have the mysterious lights. There are a number of crazy stories about the Navy seeing weird, mysterious lights in the sky. Some of them truly believe that it's from UFOs. Let's take a look at one of these stories now. According to an ex-member of the Navy, one night the crew on board the ship were surprised when all of a sudden the sky was illuminated by these bright lights. The lights were going on and off in this weird pattern, like disappearing and then reappearing in the sky. In fact, the radar said that there was nothing there. To this day, they don't know what it is that they saw. Maybe it was lights from a UFO. Who knows? In our 8th spot today, we have the USS Cyclops. This case is considered one of the most mysterious missing Navy ship cases that there is. So on February 16th, 1918, the USS Cyclops set out to Baltimore from Rio. It was estimated to arrive on March 13th, but the ship never made it. The ship and all the 306 members on board disappeared without a trace. The ship was never found, nor were any of their bodies. Now, there's a lot of things here that don't make sense. For example, how could the biggest ship in the US Navy disappear without a trace? Number 2, if they were in trouble, why didn't they send an SOS signal? Number 3, why are there no signs of wreckage found? Seriously, no evidence of the ship or the 306 men were ever found. It's as if it just disappeared to thin air. In our 7th spot today, we have the human remains. This next story comes from Reddit user Bickish. According to him, his brother was once in the Navy. One day, the brother was showing his family some of the old videos from one of his tours. In the video, there was this one shot where you could see something that looked like a box floating in the waters. It looked just like fallen cargo or something like that. But no, his brother paused the video at that exact moment and told his family what it really was. Apparently, the crew got into the water and went over to see what it was, and it was an old floating fridge. Except it was weird because the fridge was locked. When they managed to get it open, they found a dead human body in it. The worst part, the fridge had scratches on the inside. This person had been put in there and then tried to escape. The killer and the victim have still not been identified to this day. Moving on at number 6, we have the ghost sailor. This story was shared by Bennett93ish on Reddit. According to this Reddit user, their great uncle was in the merchant navy in the 50s and 60s. One day he was in the engine room cleaning up when he heard a thud come from one of the pieces of machinery. He turned around and saw a guy standing on top of it, just waving. He didn't recognize this guy, but also he was new to the ship, so he wasn't that familiar with everyone there yet. Anyways, he yelled at the guy to get down, but the guy didn't listen, so he left to get his senior officer. When he went back to the engine room, the man was gone. Upon describing the man to the senior officer, he told him that the guy he saw was a worker who had fallen overboard and passed away during a previous voyage. His ghost now apparently haunts the ship that he lost his life on. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the ghostly woman. Reddit user Lord of the No Pants, love that name, was in the Navy for about 12 years. He recalled this spooky, mysterious encounter he had. Basically, he was standing watch in a submarine engine room when all of a sudden he heard a woman's voice. Now, this was back in the day when no women were allowed on submarines. So obviously, he was really freaked out by this. He got up, looked around, but no one was there. He sat down and that's when he heard it again. It was clearly coming from outside of the hatch he was sitting under. The mystery remains. Who was this creepy woman that he kept hearing? In our fourth spot today, we have Navy Flight 19. On December 5th of 1945, 5 Navy Avenger torpedo bombers headed out from the Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The planes were known as Flight 19. They were scheduled to do a 3-hour exercise in the area that is now considered the Bermuda Triangle. However, this exercise went terribly, terribly wrong. The weather started to turn and they lost radio contact. All the planes disappeared without a trace. But wait, it gets weirder. 13 crew members were then set out to look for the missing crew and planes. These crew members also disappeared without a trace. So on that day, 27 people disappeared into thin air. Of course, this is one of the stories that led to the eventual Bermuda Triangle urban legend that we know today. Moving on to number 3, we have USS the Sullivans. This is another very haunted Navy ship with a pretty creepy backstory. So the ship itself is the only ship in the US Navy that is named after more than one person. It's actually named after 5 people, the Sullivan brothers. All were killed in World War II during a submarine attack. Now these brothers were inseparable. When one of the brothers said they were joining the Navy, the other 4 joined as well so that they could always be together. Sadly, it didn't end well for them or their parents, who were heartbroken beyond belief. Anyways, after their death, they named the ship after them. And apparently, the brothers like to haunt this ship. I mean, it's named after them, so I could see why they would want to haunt it, but still. A number of people have witnessed the radios clicking on by themselves and broadcasting static. Lights on board the ship will also flicker by themselves. And a number of people have seen the shadowy figure of the eldest Sullivan brother, George. Additionally, there's a picture on board the ship of all 5 brothers in uniform. But apparently, if you try to take a picture of the image, only 4 of the brothers will appear. George will not. Why? Because legend goes that he's out roaming the seas in ships looking for his lost brothers, like he did in real life. That's very sad, and also very spooky. In our second spot today, we have the dead sheep. Okay, this next story is actually horrifying. It comes from a man who spent 28 years in the US Navy, mainly on aircraft carriers. One memory he will never forget was in the early 2000s when they were around the Persian Gulf. Basically, while out sailing, they came across thousands of dead sheep just floating in the water. Yeah, you heard me. Pun not intended. Anyways, apparently there was a ship that hauls a bunch of sheep, and a lot of sheep on board died. So what did they do? They just tossed all the dead carcasses out to sea. So for quite some time, they literally had to sail through piles upon piles of dead sheep. No thank you. That's bad. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the prediction. In 1920, Lieutenant Colonel Pete Ellis predicted the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which would then happen 21 years later. Basically, this guy was kind of considered an oddball. He would often work alone and work late hours. One night, people thought he literally went mad. He was talking about Japan attacking several islands and the use of torpedo planes. Keep in mind, torpedo planes weren't invented yet. So yeah, he sounded pretty crazy. And then, when the prediction did come true, he requested time off. He was given a sealed envelope and sent off to Europe. But he never arrived. Instead, he went to Japan, where he died under mysterious circumstances. Then an acquaintance of his decided to travel there to look for him. And guess what? He also died under mysterious circumstances. Now, there is more to the story than that, but it's just so freaking creepy and mysterious. Like, how did he predict that? And what happened to him?
All right, I'm gonna kick things off with a little mission from World War II called Operation Mincemeat. So this whole operation does not sound like something that would happen in real life. If someone were to sit down and outline this plan to your face, you'd probably laugh and then be like, we are in the middle of World War II though, so like, why are you joking around? We have kind of an important job to do here. But all of this really did happen. So this mission was carried out by the British, and the goal here was to throw off Germany about the Allies' plans for an upcoming military operation. So in 1943, the British got hold of the body of a guy who died after eating rat poison. Then they dressed him up as an officer and created a complete fictional identity for him. They attached a briefcase containing fake documents to his wrist, and then released the body off the coast of Spain. The documents contained all these clues that kind of pointed to the Allies planning to launch an invasion in southern Europe. The idea was to make the Axis powers think the Allies were planning to attack where they least expected, causing them to divert their military away from the actual target. Everything just hinged on this body being found and the Germans figuring out the clues in these fake documents. And by some miracle, it all works. The body washed up on shore, it was discovered, the Germans were contacted, and they fell for the ruse. And this ended up being a big part of the success of the Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943, known as Operation Husky. By tricking the enemy into expecting an attack in a different location, Operation Mincemeat helped create the advantage the Allies needed.
Next up we have the Ghost Army, another secretive World War II operation. This was top secret Allied unit, a real creative bunch called the Ghost Army. Their mission was to fool the enemy. This special unit was made up of artists, designers, and actors with a mission to create big illusions to trick the Axis forces. Again, this is gonna sound like a Monty Python sketch, but the Ghost Army actually used things like inflatable tanks, trucks, and artillery, basically giant balloons that looked like real military equipment. From a distance, these inflatable props, also known as rubber dummies, were so convincing that even enemy planes were fooled. The idea was to make the enemy think there was a huge army when, in reality, there were just a handful of soldiers. The Ghost Army also played with sound and radio to play tricks. They broadcasted fake radio signals that mimicked the sounds of a large army, complete with fake talk and secret code words. This made the enemy believe that the Allied forces were moving in different directions than they actually were. The Ghost Army's existence was top secret for a long time. It was only in the 90s that their existence became declassified.
Next up, we have more inflatable fun with the Blowup Dolls the CIA would use to dupe the KGB during the Cold War. And yes, they used that type of blow-up doll, the ones that lonely people use. Not me. A man named Walter McIntosh was behind this creative little trick. He's been behind some of the most successful CIA missions in history, but this one was probably his strangest. So there was a big problem for the CIA. All their spies in Moscow were always being followed around by pesky Russian counter spies. The US was watching Russia, Russia was watching the US. It's just how it was at the time. It was a spy festival everywhere you went. And being that this was the 70s, adult shops are kind of like McDonald's. They were just all over the place. At least that's how I kind of always picture the 70s. So they got the bright idea to use some of these nighttime dolls as decoys to allow CIA operatives to quickly slip out of the passenger side of their vehicles while the driver quickly inflated the doll, making it appear as though there was still two people in the car. As long, as they weren't being pursued too closely, this did prove to be pretty effective.
Next up we have Operation Jedra. In the thick of World War II, there was a covert plan called Operation Jedra that brought together teams of unique trios of soldiers. Each team had 3 soldiers, each from a different allied nation, who would be dropped behind enemy lines to cause some trouble for the Axis powers. These teams were secret squads, often included one soldier from the US, another from the UK, and the third from somewhere else in the allied crew. They parachuted into occupied territory in Europe to team up with the local resistance groups. They were trained to be sneaky, pulling off guerrilla warfare tactics. Their job was to stir things up, sabotage enemy operations, gather intel, and generally make life difficult for the Third Reich. They'd blow up bridges, disrupt supply lines, and gather info about enemy movements.
Next on the list we have Operation Chaos. Now this one is one of the most controversial top secret operations in US history. Definitely not as positive as many of the stuff on this list, but you can bet it had a pretty big impact on the people's trust in the government going forward. Operation Chaos was an operation from 1967 to 1974. It was a top secret CIA project targeting US citizens. The goal was to keep tabs on, and in some cases just infiltrate groups that were critical of the government, especially those involved or suspected of being involved in anti-Vietnam War and civil rights activity. It'd secretly gather all this info on these groups and figure out what they were planning. At every protest, meeting, rally at the time, whatever, you could bet there were agents keeping an eye on things and gathering information. They'd even use fancy gadgets to electronically eavesdrop on people. It was government overreach at its finest, a total violation of people's privacy.
Next up, we have Operation Fortitude South. This was a very slick move during World War II that involved some serious bluffing. So during the lead up to D-Day, the big Allied invasion in Normandy, everybody knows something massive is brewing, but where and when. The Allies wanted to keep the Germans guessing about where the main attack was coming from. So kinda like with Operation Mincemeat, they came up with this plan to make it look like the invasion was going down in a different spot. They set up a fake army they referred to as the 1st US Army Group, complete with inflatable tanks and trucks. They were designed to trick German reconnaissance planes into thinking a big invasion force was gearing up in the Pas de Calais, when the actual invasion was going down in Normandy. They wanted the Germans to concentrate their defenses there, leaving Normandy a bit more vulnerable. Well, in the end, the bluff worked and the Allies pulled off one of the most significant military maneuvers of the war.
Next on the list, we have Project Blue Book. Now, it's hard to say how much of an impact this really had on history. That really depends where you stand on the existence of aliens. And if you know anything about me, you know I'm big into them. So Project Blue Book is good in my book. Most of this stuff is also kept very top secret, so we don't really know 100% what they found, but it's pretty cool that this group even existed in the first place. Project Blue Book was a branch of the United States Air Force that ran from 1952 to 1969, and their sole focus was investigating reports of unidentified flying objects, pretty much the real-life X-Files. There was a big surge in UFO sightings in the early 50s to the point where it kind of became a public concern. I'm sure that didn't have anything to do with all the sci-fi movies coming out at the time, but the Air Force established Project Blue Book to go out and collect, analyze, and then document all these UFO reports. Thousands of sightings were reported and investigated during its existence. So when someone reported a UFO sighting, it would be examined by experts from Project Blue Book to try and see if there were any natural, everyday explanations for what people were seeing. And if an incident couldn't be easily explained, it was officially labeled as unidentified. One of the most famous cases investigated by Project Blue Book was the 1965 UFO sighting in Exeter, New Hampshire. Witnesses reported seeing strange lights in the sky, and 2 police officers even saw a large unidentified craft hovering above some trees, with one of the officers being quoted saying it was as big as a barn. The Air Force couldn't come up with any logical explanation.
Next up is Operation Gunade. So this was a crucial mission during World War II where a group of Norwegian exiles and British sabotaged a heavy water production facility in German-occupied Norway. Heavy water was crucial in Germany's atomic bomb project, so if successful, this would throw a wrench into the Third Reich's development of nuclear weapons. In 1943, a team of Norwegians were parachuted into the rugged terrain near the facility. The team successfully infiltrated the facility after dodging guards and mines. They snuck into the plant through a cable duct, planted explosives, and then got out of there before setting them off, causing significant damage to the facility. This set the Germans back 6 months. Then a year later, Norwegians sabotaged the Third Reich again when they sunk a ship hauling a big supply of heavy water to Germany.
Alright, next up we have Operation Gold, also known as Operation Stopwatch. This was another Cold War era intelligence mission carried out by the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. The mission had a very specific target: the Soviet Union's communication lines. There was a lot of tension between the Western powers and the Soviet Union, especially in the early years of the Cold War. Everyone was trying to figure out what the other side was up to. Now, communication is key, and the Soviets were sending messages via telegraph cables that ran through the city of Berlin. Operation Gold was hatched to secretly tap into these cables to eavesdrop and gather intel. So they went about this in probably the bluntest way possible. They tunneled under the city so they could have direct access to the communication lines and tap into them. A tunnel was dug from West Berlin to East Berlin, and it was fully equipped with listening devices. But things didn't quite go according to plan, to put it lightly. The Soviets found out not about the tunnel. Actually, they'd really known about it pretty much all along. There was a mole in the operation. Literally, see what I did? It's a mole. It's underground. There's a man named George Blake. He'd informed the KGB of the CIA and M16's plan. The KGB didn't immediately expose it either. Instead, they let the operation continue while having some fun and like feeding them false info through the tapped lines. Eventually though, in 1956, the Soviets revealed that they did know about the tunnel, pretending they'd accidentally stumbled on it.
And finally, we have the arrest of Robert Hansen. Not the butcher baker Robert Hansen, Robert Hansen the spy. I don't know how you'd confuse the two. Hansen was a former FBI agent who became one of the most infamous double agents in the history of espionage. He spied for the Soviet Union and later Russia from 1979 to 2001, giving them sensitive material for over 2 decades. Top secret stuff related to US counterintelligence and national security. This whole story really does sound like it's from a spy movie. It's hard to believe stuff like this actually happens, but it actually happened. He would use dead drops, secret locations where he would leave information for his Russian handlers to pick up. It went on for years, again from 1979 to 2001. Somehow he managed to avoid suspicion for all of that time. The FBI had been investigating leaks of classified information and began to suspect Hansen was involved. It was in 2001 that he was finally exposed. When the FBI finally arrested Hansen, they found that he had compromised a number of intelligence operations and even exposed the identities of US agents working against the Soviet Union and Russia. In 2002, he was convicted of espionage and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
What did you guys think of all these secretive missions? What's your favorite declassified secret mission that you learned about in school?
Have you been on a secret mission? I'm a spy.
Same here.
Oh shit. Oh, that's so awkward that we're both there. Someone has to leave.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have this haunting call. Whales truly are some of the coolest animals on Earth, and humpback whales are no exception. The males of the species are known for their songs, which last from 10 to 20 minutes and are actually pretty complex. They will repeat these songs for hours at a time, and it honestly isn't exactly known why they sing these songs at all. All the males in the group will produce the same song, and it will change seasonally. The females are also able to produce noise, but for some reason it is only the males who seem to produce these long songs. It is unclear how the whales even produce these sounds, however, because they don't actually have vocal cords. This is all super cool and interesting, but the whole reason you're here is for the sound, so let's take a listen to a more haunting track released by the humpback whale. Okay, so please tell me I'm not alone in thinking that that was the most beautifully haunting sound I've ever heard come from the sea. But also imagine being alone in the ocean, not knowing what that was, and then hearing it. Probably pretty terrifying, right? At least we're all safe here in YouTube land. In our number 9 spot today, we have this marine chorus. Okay, so out of context, if I played you this sound, what would you think it is? Definitely not something underwater, right? Well, as it turns out, this sound was indeed captured under the water, and these are the sounds of fish calls. While I always expected the chorus of marine animals to sound a little more similar to the stylings of Sebastian the crab, apparently that isn't even close. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't even know that most fish had calls, but it turns out that our human ears just can't perceive all of the hoots, moans, barks, and chirps that take place in the vast seas. This recording actually helped scientists realize that there are fish who sing together in a chorus every day at dusk and dawn. There have now been around 800 species of fish that have been identified and confirmed to make some form of noise, and apparently some fish even engage in shouting matches in noisier parts of the ocean, which is kind of hilarious to imagine. I guess on the list of creepy noises, this one is less creepy and more just informative. In our number 8 spot today, we have the whistle. This is a sound that was first recorded in 1997 by the NOAA and was the source of many mysteries for years, while people speculated about what may have caused the sound. While it still isn't exactly clear, it is now believed that the sound may have come from an underwater volcano eruption. If you didn't know, underwater or submarine volcanoes are located in all oceans on our Earth, and they're extremely interesting. There are certain kinds of marine animals that only exist near these extreme environments. Many submarine volcanoes are located located near the areas of tectonic plate formations, which are also known as mid-ocean ridges. There's a YouTube user called Some Canadian, and they left a comment on a video of this whistle sound that pretty much sums it up exactly. First, we'll listen to the sound played at 10 times the original speed. The comment read, quote, "It could be the sound of something moving through tunnels. 1. Volcanic eruptions and gases. 2. Something big and hungry. You choose." I think they might really be onto something there. In our number 7 spot today we have Bloop. Why are all of the weirdest ocean sounds first recorded in 1997? Bloop is another one that came from that year, and it was a loud and unusual sound that was placed as occurring several times off the southern coast of South America, and it was so loud that it could be heard over 5,000 kilometers away. At first, researchers were confused because, while the sound was actually similar to known sounds of living creatures, it was just way too loud that not even the blue whale, the largest living creature, could have produced it. So what is it then? Well, as it turns out, it is in fact not the Kraken, and instead it is actually consistent with ice quakes that are generated by large icebergs as they crack and fracture. It seems like this sound, going with that explanation, doesn't really make sense, but hey, I'm no scientist. But here's the sound for you to judge for yourself. In our number 6 spot today we have the Western Pacific Biot twang. In 2014, researchers and scientists heard weird sounds coming from the Mariana Trench, which, for the record, seems like the worst place for there to be strange noises coming from. For years, experts couldn't pin down this sound, and it was dubbed the Western Pacific Biot twang, and while there is now a theory that was proposed by researchers from Oregon State University, they have also said that they might be entirely wrong. First, for reference, here's a little clip of the sound I'm talking about. Okay, so if you're like me, my mind immediately went to something alien related or some sort of creature that perhaps we haven't yet discovered. I mean, this is the Mariana Trench we're talking about. The theory put forward by the Oregon State researchers was that perhaps this may be a new type of baleen whale call. Okay, that's probably the best of all of the options, but I really don't like when someone tells me the answer to a scientific mystery only to tell me that that might not actually be the answer at all. While the low part of the sound would make sense to attribute to the baleen whale, it's the end high-pitched twangy part that would be incredibly unique. The wide range of frequencies in the sound are what continues to baffle those who are trying to find the source of this mysterious sound. In our number 5 spot today we have Julia. Julia is a sound that was recorded in 1999 by the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, which I've already talked about today. It sounds like it could be straight out of a horror movie, so considering it was a sound that came from our ocean and at first no one could tell where it had come from, it really was quite frightening. The sound has now likely been demystified, as researchers are pretty positive they know the origin of it. It is now believed that this sound was caused by an iceberg running aground off Antarctica. The sound, however, was insanely loud. It was so loud that it could be heard over the entire equatorial Pacific Ocean autonomous hydrophone array. Researchers were later able to narrow down what they believe may have been the point where the sound originated, although they've never actually been able to pinpoint it exactly. Most of the time when people hear the Julia sound, they hear it sped up at 16 times the original speed, but today we are going to listen to a clip of the sound at regular speed because I think it is much more eerie this way. In our number 4 spot today we have Knock. Okay, this is one that I'll admit was not captured by a submarine, but it was still underwater and it truly is terrifying. A few years ago, a beluga whale named Knock, who was unfortunately in captivity, was recorded as he swam below the water. Beluga whales have been called the canaries of the sea, and for good reason, but Knock really wanted to up the ante and instead blessed us all with this sound. Nock had this uncanny ability to mimic the rhythm and tone of human voices, and it truly is kind of frightening. It of course is also a little sad, as part of this was probably because he spent most of his life being forced to listen to humans speak because he was being held in captivity. Before this recording of Nock, the voices of belugas and their sometimes human-like sounds have been talked about, but Nock was the first time it was recorded, and honestly, I kind of wish it hadn't been. In our number 3 spot today we have the bioduck. Since the 1960s, this sound has absolutely stumped researchers who heard it. This sound was basically what the name attributed to it would suggest. It sounded like some sort of mechanical duck. For decades, researchers would hear this sound and it would often be heard and recorded again in the spring and winters. After all of these years though, it seems as though the answers to this mysterious sound are finally coming to light. In 2013, researchers attached sensors that collect acoustic data to 2 whales. One of those tags recorded for 18 hours and the other for 8, and the whales they were attached to were traveling with other whales in groups of 5 to 40, and they were all eating basically the entire time. Throughout this time, with the tags on the whales, there were a total of 32 calls heard, and this data is what led researchers to finally understand where the bioduck sound was coming from. As it turns out, this mysterious sound was actually the call of the minke whale. Researchers still aren't exactly clear as to what the call means to the whales, but it was a fantastic discovery that finally closed an almost 50-year-old scientific mystery. In our number 2 spot today we have Upsweep. We all know how little we know about the ocean, and that also includes what kind of creatures lie in it. So while this mysterious sound out of context probably wouldn't be that freaky, when put into this situation it becomes quite a bit more eerie. This sound is referred to as upsweep, and it was caught when the Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory started its sound surveillance system in August of 1991. The sound is apparently more seasonal, with its peaks in spring and fall, but it is unclear if the changing of seasons is responsible for this sound, or if it's coming from something that lurks in the ocean and remains undiscovered. Just for reference, here's a clip of that sound played at 20 times the original speed. It is possible that this sound could be coming from underwater volcanic activity, but it is also possible that it's not, so who really knows? In our number 1 spot today we have an earthquake. Okay, so to add another creepy Mariana Trench sound to this list, we have one that was taken from the bottom of the Challenger Deep. In fact, it was the first ever sound recording to be taken from the bottom of the Challenger Deep, so it's a pretty cool scientific advancement as well as a terrifying sound. Despite the crushing pressures and the fact that there's no sunlight, the Challenger Deep is actually pretty noisy, and that is because of the fact that sound travels a really long way underwater, which ends up kind of turning the Challenger Deep into a sort of echo chamber of oceanic sounds. So while the recording was able to pick up things like the sound of a boat almost 11 kilometers overhead and the sounds of whale calls, they were also able to pick up the sound of a magnitude 5 earthquake rumbling near Guam on July 16th, 2015. I'm not gonna lie, while being one of the scariest things I've ever heard, this is also one of the coolest things I've ever heard in my life too. Science really is just so cool sometimes.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Ice Finger of Death. This footage was captured by the BBC off the coast of Antarctica. A creepy, twisting column of ice reaches down to the sea floor and then begins to spread out, killing every living thing it touches. You can see it here just wiping out a whole colony of unwitting crabs. It's caused by new sea ice forming at the surface of the water that is so salty it begins to sink and freeze. This is called a brinicle. Now at first it baffled scientists and scared people who saw the footage, with some people calling it slow lightning and wondering if larger versions could form that could actually threaten humans. For now though, scientists are continuing to unpick this fascinating mystery and study the Ice Fingers of Death. Moving on to number 9 now, we have the Millennium Falcon. In June 2011, a scan of the ocean floor near Sweden and Finland revealed something very strange. It looked, and there's no other way to say this, like the Millennium Falcon spaceship from Star Wars. Don't believe me? Take a look for yourself. It was found at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, and scientists were absolutely baffled. In the absence of any real answers, people just started coming up with their own theories, which ranged from a simple rock formation to a crashed UFO. Eventually, a team from Ocean X went down there to investigate. At first, they thought it was just a stone cliff, but as they approached it, they realized it was more in the shape of a giant mushroom with rounded sides and rugged edges. It had an egg-shaped hole at the top, as well as strange circle formations that looked like small fireplaces. They were even covered in something that looked like soot. The team concluded that it must be a natural formation, but they don't understand how it was formed, especially because no volcanic activity has ever been reported in the Baltic Sea. Do any of you have any good theories? Next up at number 8 now, we have the underwater pyramid. A few years ago, a huge anomaly was found off the west coast of Mexico. To many people, it looked like a pyramid, but deep underwater. Now, of course, this caused an explosion online among UFO enthusiasts who believed it to be an ancient relic of an alien civilization. It was first spotted by UFO enthusiast Marcelo Igazusta, who was using Google Earth to search for signs of global UFO activity. Now, to this day, you can still use his coordinates to go and see that feature on Google Earth. It's thought to be about 11 miles across, which would make it about 10 times the size of the Great Pyramid of Cholula, the largest known pyramid structure on the planet to date. The area is a hotbed of volcanic activity, and the feature may very well be a product of that, but this hasn't stopped the UFO enthusiasts searching for more answers. Moving on to number 7 now, we have the underwater rivers. In Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula lies a very interesting phenomenon, underwater rivers, and they look like this. But how exactly does this happen? Well, basically, when a limestone bedrock collapses, it sinks and forms a pit. This creates a reservoir that then fills up with a mixture of fresh and groundwater and salt water. Finally, when organic matter ends up in there and decomposes, it produces hydrogen sulfide, which separates the fresh water at the top from the seawater below. Now, all of this understanding is quite a recent thing. To the first divers that saw this, it simply looked like an underwater river. Next up at number 6 now, we have the Milky Sea. For centuries, sailors who have been out to the most distant parts of the ocean kept reporting a mysterious phenomenon all over the world, the Milky Sea. Miles and miles of pale, milky, glowing water. When they returned, many people didn't believe them or thought they were just mistaken. But in the modern era, sailors are still reporting it. Finally, in 2005, a group of scientists led by Dr. Stephen Miller of the Naval Research Laboratory in Monterey, California, decided to investigate. They studied reported cases and found that on at least one occasion there was a bioluminescent bacteria in the water known as Vibrio harveyi. In order for them to cause the effects that have been described, they would have to congregate in massive numbers, and that is still very much a mystery. There are theories out there, but the Milky Sea story is not over yet. And I think that's really cool. Moving on to number 5 now, we have Pavo Petri. This is an ancient Greek city, thought to be over 5,000 years old. In 1000 BC, an earthquake resulted in the entire city being swallowed up by the sea. The area never re-emerged again, and so it has been relatively well preserved. Entire roads, houses, gardens, temples, and cemeteries are almost as they were the day they were flooded. In 2009, scientists used sonar mapping techniques developed by the military to make Pavo Petri the first submerged town to be digitally surveyed in 3D. Now scientists have a big task ahead of them to figure out who these people were, what their lives were like, and where did they go when their homes sunk beneath the waves. Next up at number 4 now, we have the giant squid. For centuries, sailors told tales of the Kraken, an impossibly big squid-like creature that lived at the bottom of the ocean, only surfacing to smash up ships and drag sailors down to their watery graves. Although the Kraken has now fallen into folklore, a very real creature may have taken its place, the giant squid. It can grow up to 55 feet long and was never even photographed alive until 2004. Scientists know very little about this creature. They don't know its daily behavior patterns. They don't know whether it comes to the surface or remains deep at the bottom of the ocean all of the time. They don't know how fast it can swim, whether it uses its tentacles to catch prey. They don't even know what it eats or how long they live for. The giant squid may prove to be one of the last mysteries of the ocean, forever lurking below the depths of human knowledge. Moving on to number 3 now, we have the immortal jellyfish. Some humans search for immortality. One species may already have the answer to that. The scientific name for this jellyfish is Turritopsis dorni. Its nickname is the immortal jellyfish. Just like every other living thing, it ages, except when it comes to the point where it should start dying, the immortal jellyfish just says, nah. It then reverts back to its sexually immature stage, essentially becoming a child again. Their tentacles retract, their bodies shrink, and they sink to the ocean floor to start their whole cycle all over again. Now, scientists still aren't sure about how the jellyfish are able to do this. That's one reason to study them. Another is that if we find out how they're doing this, we could use it to fight old age diseases in humans, or maybe even figure out immortality for ourselves. Do you think that's a good idea though? At the number 2 spot now, we have the purple orb. In 2016, the team operating the exploration vessel Nautilus came across a strange purple orb on the ocean floor off the coast of California, and it appeared to be alive. The scientists were stumped. They had never seen anything like it before. They joked about it being a spider egg sac or a tiny mama octopus. They even nicknamed it Blobus purpurus, and they weren't the only ones who were interested in it. A crab was there too. The crab was just knocking this purple blob around, and the team had to basically prise it from its claws to retrieve it. After taking it back to a lab to study, scientists were very puzzled as to what exactly it was. After analysing it though, they believed it to be a variant of a sea slug. A purple orb sea slug. And finally, number 1 now, we have the bloop. In 1997, the bloop sound was heard deep underwater in the Pacific by multiple listening stations that were thousands of miles apart. Take a listen to the famous bloop. What was that? It was a total mystery. What made the bloop sound? Theories started to arise. Many believed that it was made by a massive unknown animal that had been awoken at the bottom of the ocean, but what could make a noise that loud? After studying the noise, NOAA, the research group, had determined that the noise wasn't made by an animal, but rather a natural event instead. They believed that it was the cracking of an ice shelf breaking up in Antarctica that sent sound waves right through the Pacific. Now, of course, even to this day, there's a hardcore group of people that still believe the bloop was definitely animal made.
And we're going to start things off with Point Dume underwater base. So off the coast of Point Dume in Malibu, there seems to be this mysterious structure lying about 6 miles underwater. Images captured on Google Earth show an oval-shaped object resting on the seabed floor. Looks like it has a large flat top and what seems to be pillars or columns. Looking at it, it definitely looks like the entrance to something. It sits about 2,000 feet beneath the ocean surface, spanning nearly 3 miles in width, and some speculate that it could be more than just a naturally formed structure. And yes, some even think it could be an underwater alien base. Jimmy Church, who hosts a California-based radio show called Fade to Black, was pretty excited about the images, stating, "My first impression was that it was Greek. It looked artificial and didn't look natural. When you're looking at it from above, it's a nearly perfect oval shape. In the natural surroundings, nothing is symmetrical. Everything is eroded and covered in rocks and sloping and peaking. And right here, for 2 miles, it is a perfect oval with a black separation or outline to it. It just stands out that it has to be some type of roof. It's not unlike a dome stadium or a covered indoor racetrack or an Olympic arena. It's got that feel to it. It looks like a perfect oval man-made structure sitting on a construction site." Next up, we have the Solomon Islands UFOs. There have been some very strange things said to go on here for hundreds and hundreds of years, and not only have locals claimed to see strange lights in the sky, but also coming up from under the water as well, which has led to a pretty intense theory that there could be an underwater alien base there. There have always been local legends of monstrous giants on the islands, 10-foot tall, hairy creatures with flat noses and glowing red eyes. That, combined with the reports of strange lights in the sky, moving with incredible speed and agility, could mean there may be some kind of connection here. You see, some of these lights and strange flying objects have been seen descending down into the trees of the Guadalcanal or rising up from the ocean and zipping around before diving back down. There are also legends that these giants that are said to live on the island move around through subterranean tunnels. So some speculate that beneath the surface of the ocean is this hidden structure where extraterrestrial beings may be conducting their activities. Next up, we have Hy-Brasil, a small mythological island off the coast of Ireland. According to Celtic folklore, this island is said to lie off the west coast of the country, appearing only every 7 years, usually surrounded by mist. The island is often described as a paradise with advanced technology and a society living in total harmony with nature. Sailors and explorers have reported spotting the island for centuries, claiming to have seen strange creatures and these glowing godlike beings there. Maps from the 14th to the 19th centuries often included Hy-Brasil, but its exact location was always a bit of a mystery. Now, of course, it sounds like complete folklore, which Celtic culture is absolutely full of, but what if there's something else going on here? Well, some have suggested that the islands appearing and disappearing could have an extraterrestrial connection. The idea is that aliens could be using advanced cloaking technology or have a hidden base on or beneath the island, and the mysterious creatures that some sailors claimed to have seen on the island do sound like they could be alien-like, but it's still a total mystery as to what they'd be doing over there. Next up on the list, we have strange skulls that were found in an underwater cave in Mexico. So in 2012, divers were exploring a cenote and the Yucatan Peninsula where they came across two chambers full of human bones, and some of these bones were human skulls, but there was something off about them. They were elongated. Now, the ancient Maya were said to have performed human sacrifices in the area, and skull deformation was also practiced in various parts of Mexico way back when. There are theories as to why, but nothing entirely concrete. One idea is that high-ranking members of society had elongated skulls. Some say that people's skulls were elongated just to differentiate certain groups from one another, but there's also the theory that these skulls never belonged to human beings at all. Pretty common knowledge, of course, that there are tons of conspiracy theories surrounding the ancient Maya, including the presence of extraterrestrials that may have helped them construct all their intricate advanced cities. So could these skulls have belonged to these supposed alien beings? It's possible. Next up, we have the Lake Baikal incident. So this lake in southern Siberia is the world's largest freshwater lake by volume. It's incredibly deep, and there are some pretty eerie stories about it. First of all, there's all the mysterious lights that are reported, not just hovering or flying above it, but also coming from the depths of the water. And there's a very creepy story that was supposedly an attempted cover-up by the Russian government. So in 1982, a team of Navy divers were doing a routine diving exercise in the lake when a number of them started spotting something pretty disturbing. There were all these figures deep under the water. They were tall and slender, well over 6 feet tall, and wearing what looked to be silver suits. Those suits could have also been silvery scales. They also had large, circular, glowing, unblinking eyes. The creatures began chasing after the divers, or swimming after them, rather, and the divers panicked and then swam back up to the surface, and they reported what they'd seen to their superiors, but that's where the story ends. The existence of the strange creatures has never been confirmed or denied. Next up, we have underwater alien bases in Alaska. So claims of alleged alien bases lurking beneath the waters off the coast of Alaska have been around for quite a while, but in recent years, the idea of them has become more of a popular thing, mostly thanks to Ancient Aliens. Thank you, Ancient Aliens. But apparently, there are even eyewitness accounts dating back several decades, which have been mostly undisclosed until recently. UFOologists ufologists and UFO enthusiasts have now been turning their attention to the mysterious activities in the waters of Alaska. One incident dates back to 1945 when crew members of a ship reported spotting an unidentified craft. Researchers, including members of MUFON, or the Mutual UFO Network, which is a non-profit organization that studies reported UFO sightings, they think it's possible that extraterrestrial beings have been constructing bases beneath the ocean's surface, and that's because there are tons of reports of UFO movements over the water. There were also a number of UFO sightings in the 40s that weren't disclosed to the public at the time. These undisclosed reports allegedly provide evidence that there are extraterrestrial entities operating in the waters off the coast of Alaska. This next story comes to us from Reddit, and although what this person saw wasn't technically under the water, it was floating just above it, and it's a pretty fascinating account. The story comes to us from user Keslo, who writes, I used to live in Charleston, South Carolina back around 2006, and I had a job that had me leaving home at about 4 a.m. I lived in a bad part of town near the International Airport Joint Base, so when I left, I did a scan of the area before getting into my car. One morning, I stepped out of my home to do my scan and noticed that there were thin, wispy clouds flowing in off the ocean. Basically, it was a thin fog, about 1,000 to 1,500 feet up, moving like a river. I also noticed at this point that there were two effing moons. One is obscured by the thin clouds, our real moon, and the other is most definitely under the clouds. It was a sphere of glowing white light. It made no sound and did not move. After about 2 minutes, it bolted eastward towards the ocean. The glowing light faded quickly right as it took off as well. I've seen planes move near the speed of sound, and this thing went from 0 to like 3,000 miles per hour instantly. No acceleration. Much faster than the speed of sound with no sonic boom. I hope I don't see it again, especially on the water. I always wondered if it bolted because they saw me watching them. Next up, we have the strange reports of a large disc-like object being spotted in the Indian Ocean. Apparently, as far back as 1873, ships sailing the Indian Ocean from the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea have reported spotting a massive mile-wide disc passing beneath their boats, accompanied by large, rotating lights. One of the earliest documented sightings happened on March 23rd of 1873, when the ship Adelaide traversed the South China Sea. Witnesses reported floating over a huge, glowing circular object beneath the ocean's surface. On May 15th, 1879, the crew of the HMS Vulture described the sighting of two large Ferris wheels spinning in opposite directions. The spokes of these wheels were reported to be 25 feet wide, with 100 feet of space between them. There have been tons of these reports in various locations in the Indian Ocean, over the years. On April 4th, 1901, for example, in the Persian Gulf, the crew of the SS Kilwa claimed to see rays of light emanating from an underwater disc-like object. And even in 1943, in the Persian Gulf, a sailor named Matthew Mangle reported a huge glowing disc beneath the water's surface, pacing his ship. And these are just a handful of examples. And coming in at second place is the Michigan Stonehenge. So in 2007, a professor of underwater archaeology, Mark Hawley, made a pretty incredible discovery. It was this arrangement of stones lying on the lake bed, looking a lot like Stonehenge in England. The stones are laid out in a circular pattern, and some even appear to be arranged in a line. They're about 40 feet below the surface of the lake. So what was the purpose of this formation? Could it be the remnants of an ancient civilization? Could extraterrestrials have constructed it thousands of years ago? They look like they've been placed in a pretty precise pattern. Doesn't look to be natural forming to me. And of course, there's also a rock with a mastodon carved into it. Hard to believe something like that would be created naturally. What's also really fascinating is that these stones are believed to be about 9,000 years old, predating Stonehenge by about 4,000 years. And finally, it's only only natural that we finish things off with what has to be the most famous strange object discovered deep beneath the sea, the Baltic Sea anomaly. So back in the summer of 2011, a team of Swedish treasure hunters didn't come across any treasure in terms of monetary gain anyway, but they did find something pretty cool, a sonar image that seems to show a strange UFO-like object on the sea floor. Peter Lindbergh, the leader of the treasure hunting team, would be so awesome just to be able to say you're the leader of a treasure hunting team. I could say that and I'd just be like digging through my backyard finding nothing. But this guy actually goes out on boats and submarines and does it. How did he get that job? Anyway, he's the leader of Ocean X and was pretty astonished by what he had found, saying the object definitely didn't look like a natural formation. And even though a number of researchers have come out and said it probably is a natural formation, I still get excited looking at this thing. I don't know, I'm just not entirely convinced. I'm on the fence about this one. But what do you guys think? Alien craft, ancient artifact, just some mundane natural formation? Let us know down in them comments.
If you enjoyed this video about Navy SEALs finding serious evidence for extraterrestrial life forms, then you have to check out this video next. It's about archaeological discoveries that changed history. Click the video now to find out more.